I'm a libertarian, by nature, but I've become more and more so as I've realized how little I really know about things. And it is not a good idea, I think, to try to find another cause for AIDS before we have found out whether or not the one that the world believes is true and which has caused them so much disaster. See, the cause of AIDS, supposed, HIV, has caused a lot more trouble in the world than AIDS itself. So the thing to do is to don't worry about AIDS right now. It'll go away, by God. It is going away, and it will continue to go away unless the government raises the ante. They're paying $2,500 a year to every county for every AIDS patient. So there's a reason to have AIDS in my county if I'm the health guy, because it's my budget. Like if you think about how many AIDS cases they can claim to have in LA, multiply that by $2,500, and think about how many cars and stuff you can buy with that, you can see why there's an impetus for saying if there's anybody that looks anything like an AIDS case, call it AIDS. And don't you listen to Kary Mullis. He's against the state and humanity and your daughter. But AIDS is going away nonetheless, and if we stop funding it, it would vanish overnight. HIV, however, is something we can detect, and people can make money for detecting it. And as long as when they detect it in someone, that person is pretty much cast into an incredibly bad place in which they will be injected with or coerced to take hideous drugs. Their children will be taken away from them if they won't do it to them. I mean, that's the side of it that we need to worry about. It doesn't make a damn what causes AIDS, really. But the question that we should be asking is, why have we decided that having HIV makes you our favorite Jew, nigger, smoker, whatever we want to jump on, right? You're the perfect one because you brought it on yourself while your lascivious behavior. Something like that. See, we need something like that because, by God, they took away all of our other things like that, didn't they? Those goddamn Democrats. You can't call people names anymore, except you can say they're HIV positive, and you can tell your kids, if you don't eat your cereal, you'll grow up to be HIV positive, and all that stuff. I mean, that's the thing I think we ought to think about here, not whether or not AIDS is caused by it or not. But even if it were caused by it, how do we deal with something like that when maybe it's causal for the very few people that actually get it? See, the people that get AIDS are a very small group compared to the people that have HIV. It may be causal for those people that get it, but it may be that the rest of them just don't have the right chemistry to get AIDS when they get HIV. That's a possibility, which means that AIDS is kind of a genetic heritage that makes you susceptible to some virus that most people can tolerate quite well. That's an alternate hypothesis. Given that that's true, is it fair to stigmatize all of the 99% of people that have HIV but don't have AIDS with the concept that they are going to die and you better give them some lethal drugs to hasten the process and get them out of the place? I mean, is that all right? I don't know. Maybe if you're homosexual, you should just be killed right away, too, because, you might have it, right? You might have it. We got to check you for it right away. Yeah? Yeah? They didn't do that to you, did they? Or you're just lascivious. So am I. I hadn't had one because I don't go to them. You shouldn't go to those people. You go to witch doctors, they're going to put a hex on you. And if you can prove in your mind that our doctors aren't witch doctors, then look at the definition of witch doctors and see if it doesn't fit. I mean, if you want to go to those people, go ahead, but don't expect them to treat you well. Why would you think that they're going to treat you well? That's a neurotic claim. We all know that lawyers don't treat you well, don't we? Do you come on? My lawyer is so bad, he sends me a bill. He sends me more. I mean, he tries to take me for a ride. We know that about them. We know that about ourselves. Don't lay yourself at the feet of somebody just because he puts on a white robe and makes statements in Latin. It's not that medicine doesn't have some good things going for it. They've got drugs, that's for one thing. Sometimes those are useful, but they're not made by those guys. Those guys don't even know how to write the structure of those drugs. Those are made by chemists. We don't go to chemists to find out whether we should pee at the right places or have sex in this way or that. Chemists don't know either. The doctors certainly don't know. I mean, we are living in a pretty weird planet here, but it shouldn't be that weird. It really shouldn't. You go to one profession to get the products from another profession. And the one profession tells you all that stuff about them. They don't know anything about them. The other one doesn't sell them to you. They sell them to those. You know? I mean, it's a funny kind of a thing going on there. A chemist who makes AZT himself can't go out and buy some to take. Same thing with any other drug. The chemists are making them. The chemists don't get to prescribe them. Why don't the doctors make them? Because they don't have the sense. They don't know how to do it. The doctors don't know how to make drugs. They buy them. And if they've got anything else, I'd like to see it. You know, what has changed? What is the difference between our medical people and witch doctors? It's drugs. Now, they don't make them. They have an economic way of like being the only people that can give them to you, and they make money out of doing that, and they act so cool, you know, that they really are a worthless bunch of bastards if you're sick. Okay, you don't want me to stop talking like that? Oh, okay. What do you want to know?
Yes, sir. Do you believe that there is a rise since the 80s in immunodeficiency syndrome, whether or not all be labeled under the blanket of AIDS, and whether or not HIV necessarily be the cause of it, but that certainly there is something that is attacking the immune system and killing people, or do you believe that it's no more than is ordinary or that has always been happening?
For one thing, I've never been able to quite figure out what an immunologist is talking about when he describes the condition of having antibodies to some foreign virus as being an immunodeficiency. I mean, do they mean that you can't make antibodies anymore? Do they mean that your immune cells are dying off? If your CD4 cells are, in fact, useful to you, maybe they're right. Nobody has really shown that CD4 cells are necessary. So I don't even know if immune deficiency is the way I would talk about the changes in the ratios of CD4 markers on immune cells or CD8 markers. That's what they usually measure. Nobody had ever measured that before the 1980s, and nobody's ever shown that that alone really has any kind of clinical significance. It may be that they just go up and down like the tides, and it's really not something to get all upset about. As soon as somebody puts a limit on it and says, if you got less than 200 CD4 cells, you're sick, and then they start giving you drugs that kill your CD4 cells, that could have the effect of making it look like it was a bad thing in the first place. But as far as what are all those little funny diseases, like cryptococcus and pneumocystis carinea and Kaposi's sarcoma and those kind of things that we've lumped under this term AIDS, and also uterine cancer that's been stuck under there. Except for uterine cancer, which I think was kind of like a very transparent, like the motive there was transparent. We need some more women with AIDS, right? So that was a good way to get some women. But except for that one, I say all those other things, really, the way they came about in the 80s and the late 70s were as a result of a fairly experimental lifestyle, okay? What particular aspects of that lifestyle caused them, I don't know. It's hard to figure it out. For any one of them, if you were to really pursue it and say, I'm going to figure it out, why that one? Why pneumocystis carinea ever happened? If you could disentangle it from all the rest of them and get some research funding to try to find out why certain people die these days of pneumocystis carinea, you probably could. It's probably just another goddamn disease. It was a result, probably, of a type of a life that had not been lived too much in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and probably not much ever before. Whether it was the drug use, the lack of sleep, the poor nutrition, the tremendous number of contacts with other humans, and sexual contacts is simply the least of those, by the way. The gregarious contacts of any kind with human beings will get you the flu. Okay, most viruses do not respect the gender or the genital organs of us because they're such small things and so very seldom used. They go for our lungs. Okay, I mean, that's one of the first things they made the mistake. I said, why do they think it's just venereal? Because we don't know any viruses that are. And viruses, you know, they don't live here because they're fat and rich. They live here because they're lean and clever. And if you go for the genitals when you could be going for the lungs, you're a pretty dumb virus. Right? I mean, because we blow air out. You get in an elevator with somebody. You know what? The CDC wouldn't want to be saying that, but they don't have any evidence at all. Now they've said deep kissing. On the basis of one person. But the disease is real, AIDS, but it's not a disease. The fact is real that when you start having a life that pays very little attention to the stuff your mother and your grandmother would have said, you got to have this, you got to have that. You can goddamn go out and be a Democrat if you want to, but you've got to eat and you got to sleep. And they would have said, I mean, you stop doing those things, which a lot of people did in a really big way. And I mean, the people that lived next door to me in Berkeley started looking real sick a few years after they started coming over to San Francisco at night to the bathhouses. And I don't think it had to do with the disease they got. I think it was because they didn't eat or sleep. And drugs figures into it because the only way to live without eating or sleeping is to take amphetamines to stay at work and to take downers and stuff to go to sleep between 4 and 6. You know, and then you don't have much of an appetite, and you get skinny, and you get pale, and it's fashionable, and so it's okay. But that will lead to diseases eventually, probably, unless we're real lucky.
Also, in our history, we've never had the sexual and the psychedelic revolution the way we had it in the 60s. At the end of
Hopefully neither one were harmful. I would rather let that alone. You know, we don't have anything saying either one of those things were bad for us. They were emotionally involving, and we see things like that big, close-up, and important. Okay? I think nutrition and sleep are the first ones. Psychedelics and television and whatever, and sex if you want to get into that. But, you know, sex has been around a long time. Didn't seem to hurt us. It's, in fact, necessary.
But the combination...
It'd be bad if it turned out to be lethal, wouldn't it?
I want to ask this to Kary. How do they misuse PCR to estimate all these supposed free viral RNAs that may or may not be there?
If it's, I think misuse PCR is not quite... I don't think you can misuse PCR. Actually. No, the results, the interpretation of it. See, if you can say, if they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. It starts making you believe in the sort of Buddhist notion that everything is contained in everything else, right? I mean, because if you can amplify one single molecule up to something that you can really measure, which PCR can do, then there's just very few molecules that you don't have at least one single one of them in your body, okay? So that could be thought of as a misuse of it, just to claim that it's meaningful. But the real misuse of it is that you don't need to test for HIV. You don't need to test for the other 10,000 retroviruses that are unnamed also in the subject. See, somebody that's got HIV generally is going to have almost anything that you can test for because they have definitely been... HIV is a fairly rare virus. There's only 1 million of us out of 250, 300 million people in America that have that virus. So you have to get around, either your mother had to have it and pass it to you, or you have to really be paying a lot of attention to people that do have it and paying only attention to them and get a pretty good chance of getting it that way. It's hard to get it, but if you have it, there's a good chance you've also got a lot of other ones. Because you've been in the market for them, it's been possible for you to get a lot of... to test for that one and say that has any special meaning is what I think is the problem. Not that PCR has been misused. It's like... Is it an estimation? It's not an estimation. No, it's a really quantitative thing. It tells you something about nature and about what's there, but it allows you to take a very minuscule amount of anything and make it measurable and then talk about it in meetings and stuff like it is important. See, that's not a misuse, that's just sort of a misinterpretation.
Even after all these PCR, this quantitative PCR, that if you just get down to a basic virological count, it's still 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000. HIV in 1 to 1 in 1,000, 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000 T cells.
It is. No, there's very little of what they call HIV, and what's been brought out here by Philpott and Isai already. The measurement for it is not exact at all. It's not as good as our measurement for things like apples. An apple is an apple. You know, you can get something that's kind of like, if you got enough things that look kind of like an apple and you stick them all together, you might think of it as an apple. But and HIV is like that. Those tests are all based on things that are invisible, and the results are inferred in a sense. PCR is separate from that. It's just a process that's used to make a whole lot of something out of something. That's what
also,
it is. But it's not. It doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with really was going to hurt you or anything like that. That's why it's not.
So even if you believe in HIV, it can't tell the difference between virus particles or active live virus. I mean, there's a lot of questions involved in this.